Hello, everyone. For many of you, it's good afternoon. For some of you, it's good evening. And for others, it's good morning. My name is Michał Baranowski, and I'm a director of the Warsaw office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. I'm delighted to host with our good friends in the Embassy of Japan in Warsaw this seminar on war in Ukraine and its impact for Japan and security in Asia. Big thank you to my colleagues, Christy from across the ocean in our office in DC, and Deputy Director of the Asia program at GMF for moderating this discussion. Christy, it's wonderful to have you with us in Warsaw. This is an idea that frankly came from our very good friend, Ambassador Miyajima. Ambassador, thank you for putting this forward. And this is based on the conversations that we've had before, how basically our security here in Europe depends in many ways on what's going on in Asia and Asia Pacific. And then it turned out that, of course, what happens here and with this aggression by Russia on Ukraine, it certainly impacts your security in Asia, given also the importance of the United States as an ally for both us here in NATO and for you in Asia. So this is, in fact, a conversation that we were thinking of having for a very long time, but with the war in Ukraine became more necessary than ever. And before I pass the floor to you, Ambassador, and I wanted to thank you very much for this cooperation. I do hope that this is the beginning of a long process of cooperation between GMF and Japan. But also I want to recognize, and we'll talk about it in detail, the terrible sacrifices that Ukrainian people and Ukrainian military is suffering really for our freedom and your freedom on the battlefields of Ukraine. So if you can join me in a moment of silence before I pass on the floor to Ambassador. Thank you very much. Ambassador Miyajima, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michał. Thank you very much for hosting this event. Very timely, I think. Actually, this idea just came to me because you made a very important visit to Ukraine, and then that stimulated me about this idea. Ambassador Fujisaki was my great hero, the 3 times my boss, and then former ambassador to the United States, and then Japan and Poland, the close ally to the United States. And as Michał said, that what's happening in Ukraine is such a terrible development, which is happening in Europe, but definitely it's watched by many people in Asia, and then have an immediate impact on Asian security as well. So I thought that Ms. Ambassador Fujisaki is the best person to talk about it and then answering questions from the Japanese side. And then so that this is a good start for our collaboration the coming days and coming months. Thank you, Michał. And I'm looking forward to hearing that this wonderful seminar and then learning from Ambassador Fujisaki and then very active Q&A session. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Over to you, Christy.
Great. Well, it's definitely my distinct pleasure and honor to be here today with Ambassador Ichiro Fujisaki. Ambassador Fujisaki has held several high-level diplomatic roles. He was the Japanese ambassador to the United States from 2008 to 2012. He was political minister at the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C., Director General for North American Affairs, Deputy Foreign Minister, and Ambassador to the United Nations and to the World Trade Organization. In 2018, he became president of the Nakasone Peace Institute. So in today's session, we'll begin by asking Ambassador Fujisaki to share his thoughts with us. And we'll also have time for questions from the audience, as was mentioned. So please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the session. And we really look forward to making this an interactive discussion. So we're here today for a very timely discussion of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which of course will have implications not only for Europe, but also for other countries around the world, including the Indo-Pacific region. So Ambassador, of course, this invasion has really shocked countries around the world and catalyzed an unprecedented response. Many people have been struck by Japan's tough stance on Russia in particular. So can you tell us a little bit about how Japan views the current crisis and what's driving its current actions? Ambassador, I think you're muted.
First, thank you very much for having me today. I'm very honored and privileged to be here. First, I'd like to pay respect to Polish people for welcoming and refugees who are coming at quite a rapid speed, 2 million people. And it's not easy for any country to accept those people, but we are very impressed that the Polish people are now doing that. Now, one thing I have to say is that I've retired from Japanese government service, and I'm now a admin professor, head of think tank, and this evening I'm not representing government of Japan. This is personal view expressed by a former diplomat. Your question was, how was this aggression of Russia seen in Japan? I think as in many countries, this was a really horrendous act, which was not expected at all. But at the same time, I think very frankly, this was not that shocking, if I may say, because there are authoritarian countries who think two things. One, use of force, when that's possible, is done, and they expect that to be forgotten after some years. That's point one. Point two, big boss can twist the arms of their henchmen or followers. Soviet Union has done that to Hungary, Czechoslovakia. Well, all the East European countries were under that, and that mentality was still left in Russia. That was point one, the henchmen. And very frankly, I would refer that to other Asian countries as well later, but this was not that something out of blue from that point of view. Also, we are taking very strong stance because of two reasons. One, because we have sort of been abiding by the United Nations Charter all post-war years, and we have respected United Nations. So bleach of UN Charter like this is something totally unacceptable. That's point one. Point two, our island, Northern Ireland, has been occupied by Soviet Union and Russia for 75 years now. So we know how these occupation can happen and continue. So we think that we very much respect Ukrainian people and its leader to fight against such an aggression. Thank you very much.
So you already mentioned that Russia's aggression was, of course, a breach of the UN Charter, and many people have discussed it as a blow to the international order more generally in terms of
Right.
respect for rules and norms. So could you tell us a bit about how you see Russia's actions, therefore, affecting the security environment in Asia?
If this is not punished properly, then other countries may follow the suit. Like there are countries who have used force against others in the past. China has given lesson to Vietnam in 1979. They have been building air bases in South China Sea. We have been very concerned about those things. And North Korea, they've been firing missiles, ICBMs, and also ballistic missiles, and they're conducting nuclear tests, which is against Security Council resolution. And so these countries are around us, so we cannot let those coercion by use of force continue.
So in terms of the Asian security environment, of course, many people are drawing parallels to potential situations with China, for example, and commenting on China's reaction to the Russian invasion. Can you comment on how Japan and other Asian countries have viewed the recent actions of China and its support for Russia?
I think China has, as I already mentioned, similar mentality with Russians as for the use of force and making it a sort of fait accompli after that is done. And I think that is very dangerous. So we cannot overlook those. And as for people are concerned about, for example, their attitude towards Taiwan, or our attitude towards our island of Senkaku. It's a small island of Okinawa, between Okinawa and Taiwan. So these are something we are concerned about as well, if we let the use of force, and of course, as I said, North Korea too. But it's not only those two countries, but if you let the use of force could be justified with time, then that kind of mentality could spread with other countries as well. And that's very dangerous. Thank you very much.
How do you think that the current war in Ukraine will impact U.S. alliances in U.S. and in Europe and in Asia? So many people have commented that there's been tremendous solidarity amongst European and Asian countries. Do you think that this solidarity is perhaps the beginning of a strengthening of these alliances, or do you think that there's a risk that the conflict will pull the U.S. attention toward Europe and away from Asia?
One thing that is clear now is that once upon a time, a French president said NATO is brain death or something, and he said that's obsolete only 3 years ago, Macron. But now everyone recognizes its importance and know that alliance is key for their security. If for example, Ukraine or others were in alliance, I think this may not have happened. So I think we can say that alliance is so important. We will adhere to and try to really respect Japan-US alliance. At the same time, it doesn't mean that we are concerned that the US attention is now going to Europe, and this side is not, this side of Asia is going to be overlooked, because we have to admit that there are two giants, Russia and China, and these two countries, Russia has around 6,000 nuclear arsenals, and China has 300, US has 5,000 or so. So US has to watch both Russia and China, because China may have only 300, but it's growing very rapidly, not only on nuclear, but economically and militarily. So I don't think US will just now focus on Russia and forget about the Asia Pacific. I think it's not a zero-sum game, and it should not be. So I don't think they're much concerned about that. But what's important is that we take a very firm stance, solidarity, to show that you can't just let these things happen and forget. That's the key. More often than not, sanctions were taken, but after a few years, sort of evaded, evaporated. This time, you shouldn't do that.
Speaking of these alliances and relationships across regions, many people have commented lately on the explosion of interest in the Indo-Pacific and Europe, and how Europe is much more interested in the region. Do you also see that parallel in Japan, with Japan becoming much more aware of developments in Europe beyond the invasion? Do you think this is something where ties are really growing and changing?
I think Europe and Japan both have to have peace in the world, not one country starting invading others. And so we have neighbors like Russia, China, North Korea, and we are depending on ourselves as well as the American US forces for our security. And so we are very much concerned about the present situation in Europe. And what's very important is that all those countries should show solidarity. If when we don't have alliance, we can't really go into war. So we don't do that, but we can send assistance, and we can really support Ukrainians, refugees as well. And for that, as I said in the outset, we respect Polish people for that.
We already have some questions coming in from the audience that I want to fold into this conversation. You commented about Japan's tough stance and the importance of tough sanctions. Many people have compared the current situation to 2014, when many countries were much more hesitant to respond, for example. Do you think that the reactions in 2014 to that invasion by Japan and others essentially paved the way for the current crisis? How do you view these two things in comparison?
When you say 2014, that's the Crimea. And I think the situation is very different, where the Russian aggression, how it happened. So there was no real war against Ukraine at the time. And I think people were surprised, but did not stand up. But this time, they are invading Ukraine and going into the capital and killing so many people, which didn't happen in Crimea case. So this is very different, and people cannot tolerate this killing of citizens and invading other countries, big cities. And firing missiles. So I don't think you can sort of draw a parallel there.
I'm thinking on this topic of current reactions and sanctions, which really have been quite remarkable, many would say. You know, the energy sector has often been talked about, and Japan, like many countries, is connected with Russia through its energy sector, through Russian exports, and through investments in Russian energy projects. And even if, not connected to Russia directly, has concerns about the kinds of consequences there might be for energy prices and other things. Can you talk a little bit about the perspective of Japan on these kinds of concerns and how it views the possible tightening further of these types of sanctions in the first year?
First of all, our dependence on Russian energy is very small. The percentage is comparable to United States. It's about 1/10 of Germany, for example. Germany has about nearly half of its energy dependency on Russia. On natural gas, it's 55%, crude oil 34%, coal 45%, whereas in Japan, it's crude oil 4.4%, natural gas 8.0, coal 6.5, so it's quite low. And we are much more dependent on Middle East for our crude oil, and also on Australia and Indonesia and those countries. Now, we have not taken the same stance as with United States on energy, but as I said, we are not that vulnerable. And now what some people are discussing is that we had 11 years ago huge earthquake, tsunami, and before that we were second biggest nuclear power generator in the world, next to France, and now it's very low. Some people think that we have to restart some safe nuclear power plants, or we may have to increase more dependency on other energy sectors as well. But I think even for private sector, I don't think there'll be too many new investments to Russia from now on, because it's so dangerous now. People look at it very carefully, and this is where we are on energy.
Moving a little bit to some of the domestic effects of this crisis for Japan, we've heard a lot of talk from statements like, we've heard a lot of statements from politicians such as former Prime Minister Abe, for example, arguing that Japan should step up its own defenses and engage in nuclear sharing, for example. Do you think that this conflict will influence Japan's internal discussions and debates about its security role, or perhaps its forthcoming national security strategy?
Well, yes and no. First, as you said, national security strategy has to be reviewed. It's the timing is that, so there will be discussion about how it should be formed, and some people are discussing how should our deterrence be. Will just defensive weapons be enough to have a deterrence is now being asked. And some people say we have to have some offensive capability as well. This could be under discussion. This could be discussed. I don't know how it'll be, but that's a possibility. The Prime Minister is also saying he will not exclude those issues as well, put it off from the table. At the same time, Prime Minister Kishida clearly stated that nuclear sharing or those changing nuclear policy is not in his mind, and he will not say that. And I think a majority of Japanese at this juncture is not jumping to that kind of solution to change our course because there's a very strong anti-nuclear sentiment in Japan, as you know, after bombs were dropped 75 years ago, and so 77 years ago. So.
On the subject of nuclear weapons, we have a question from the audience about how Japan can contribute to preventing Russian nuclear terrorism as a country who has experienced the consequences of nuclear weapons. How do you see Japan as playing a part in these discussions that are coming up about nuclear weapons in the wake of this invasion and war?
I think it's easy to say something positive, but that may not be too realistic that Japan can play a role in doing these things. I think, as what you have seen with the Russian aggression in the United States as well, or other countries, I think motives to decrease nuclear weapons is discouraged for the time being. They think you have to have what you have now. This is the real truth, I think. I don't think in Japan we'll try to have something new, but after what Russia has done to its neighbor, it's very difficult to say that let's everyone decrease nuclear weapons right now when there's no trust relations between amongst countries, including Russia. So I think for the moment, that it's more likely that there's a sort of the status quo continued. And once the situation has improved, I think we can start discussing more positively. But I think it's a little exaggeration if we say that, oh, Japan has a role because we have experienced. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
We also have some questions from the audience about Japan-Korea relations and the effect that this crisis might have. Do you see the Allied solidarity that we're experiencing right now in carrying over to some kind of improvement of Japan-Korea relations?
Well, yes, because there was an election 6 days ago on March the 9th, the presidential election in South Republic of Korea. And this new president-to-be has been saying the present president, Mr. Moon, has sort of deteriorated relations with us. And he's saying we have to improve our relations. So Mr. Kishida called this new president to be Mr. Yoon 2 days ago to send his congratulations, and I hope this will be so. We can't expect everything to change overnight, but it has been too remote, too cold for too long, and I think we have to ameliorate it because we have common sort of threat of North Korea as well.
We have some questions having to do with Japan's statements that it would like to welcome refugees from Ukraine. Particularly, Japan so far has only accepted 47 Ukrainian refugees and only those with friends or family already in Japan. Do you think that Japan should vastly increase the number of refugees it accepts? Or more broadly, what kind of approach do you think that Japan can take with respect to helping these people?
I think those our minister in charge has already expressed that we will try to accept those who are coming to Japan and as refugees. And I hope that Japan, just as an individual, I hope Japan will take a positive stance towards refugees. It's true that we have been a little too strict compared to other countries on refugee issues. And in this case, I'm very glad that the government is taking more positive stance. I don't know how much people will be accepting, but I hope that we can sort of have a inventive way to accept refugees who would like to come to this country. Now, of course, it's far away, so not too many people may want to come, language barriers and all that, but I think we should sort of open up facilities to have them. It's difficult in this coronavirus situation, but I think Japanese would like to welcome them warmly if they're coming. This is how I feel. But I'm not representing government in this case. But I heard government minister saying that we'll be welcoming those who are coming as well.
You mentioned previously Japan's territorial dispute with Russia, and many people have noted that particularly under Prime Minister Abe, Japan took a very conciliatory approach to Russia and tried to really engage with it. So we have questions from the audience basically asking whether you think this policy was a mistake. Was it, a mistake to try to be more conciliatory and to take the softer approach? And how do you view this now in the light of the current situation?
I personally think that it was correct, right, that Abe-san started negotiations with Russia, because this negotiation could move only when 4 conditions are met. 1, Russia is a strong leader. 2, Japan has a strong leader. 3, they have good chemistry. 4, Japan-US relation is good. And when Abe was there and Putin was there, all 4 conditions were there. Abe and Putin had a good chemistry, and Abe had a good relations with the United States. So I think it was right that he started negotiations, but unfortunately it didn't move. And I think I personally think it was good that we didn't pursue that negotiation to the end, because we were we shouldn't be giving up. So this is how I feel about it. In short, it was good, but to start, it was good to stop.
So then to follow up on that, do you view the current war as essentially a complete turning point in Japanese foreign policy as far as its policy towards Russia? Or do you see any future attempts to also try to get the Northern Territories back?
I think it's not only Russia. All the countries, Poland or United States or UK or France, their position towards Russia must have fundamentally changed for next several decades at least. So for that, I think Mr. Putin has made a huge mistake. It's not only Japan, and I don't think Japan should pursue this negotiation on territorial issue. Well, we don't call it territory issue because we think it's our island, but we should not try to get those islands sacrificing our relations with our allies or friends. And I don't think that'll happen too. Russians are not that naive, but I think in this stance, what's more important is solidarity with friends. That's the core of our security.
We have a couple of questions about what might happen if this war continues for a prolonged period of time, or what it might look like for it to come to an end. So in the event of a prolonged conflict, how do you think that Japan and other democracies in Asia and the West and the rest of the world can maintain the momentum and support of Ukraine and help in this situation?
There's two things. So one is that I think Russia is, this is my personal view, intentionally making a slow pace, because some people say it's because of strong resistance of Ukraine. Maybe true. Second, morale of Russian army is not that high. Maybe true. Maybe true. But I feel the real essence is that Putin wants Zelensky to give in. He can't have others leader because people will not follow the new leader put by Russia. So he wants Zelensky to surrender. And this is the very essence of negotiations. And I know that, well, I think that if Zelensky and Russia agreed in the negotiations, then 6 months later or 1 year later, next exercise will happen from Russia. We have seen that in our history, that in first round, you will fill up the moat around the castle, and then you go in. So the first attempt of peace could not last for too long. So this is the real essence. And I think maybe Mr. Putin is doing this slowly to take a month or two to really have Zelensky surrender. Now, in case of prolonged, I don't think will prolong for a year or two, but could surrender. I think what's most important is that we stick together. And of course, our energy situation is different. Germany is most vulnerable, but still, we have to help each other. And it's a sort of a game of patience. Which will give in first? The sanction is always that. And Russia's economy is damaged. Our economy is damaged. And I think Mr. Putin's calculation is that democracy is weaker in that sense, because in authoritarian states, you can suppress people's voices, as we have seen on Russian television. A lady, a very brave lady, came in, but she's detained now. So we have to think that this is a game of patience. Economically, we may be hit, but we have to endure.
We have another question about the role of China in the Russian-Ukrainian war and its potential involvement that some have discussed about China trying to seek an end to the hostilities and perhaps broker a peace process. What do you think about this conversation?
I think we should, I would like to see United Nations, OSCE, and United States take more positive stance toward mediating the negotiations. And I think China cannot be a broker between Russia and Ukraine or Russia and the West. And I think we know what China has been doing to their people in Uyghur or Hong Kong. So you cannot depend too much on China. I think what the US is trying to do now is to tell Chinese not to be on the side of Russia. And I think that's very important as well. And yeah.
What lessons do you think that China may have learned from this current war in Ukraine?
They're watching very carefully. If Mr. Putin, if he conquers Ukraine and get away with it, they may think, hey, that has given us a good role model. So we shouldn't be thinking that we should not want that to happen. And we have to have Mr. Putin either fail or give up, stop it, not to really get profit of this invasion. And I think that's most important regarding China. As I said, American and OSCE role, I was a bit surprised when this MiG deal didn't happen, MiG-29.
So we have also, to follow up on your point about the role of brokering peace, some questions about the UN and how you would recommend perhaps that our institutions internationally at the highest level be reformed in order to reach agreement without war, and how would you develop the soft power of big countries in order to help the UN. So what are your thoughts about the broader level of the international system and how it might need to be strengthened to cope with this kind of crisis in the future or in the present?
I think this negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, which is going on, I think will be either twisting of arms by Russia or just prolonging the process, just so that the military exercise could have time. And so, I think in order to make it a little better, I think United Nations Secretary General or someone, I don't know if Russia would accept it, would express openly that UN would come and try to be sitting in, and maybe this will be refused, but still it'll show that UN was working. And I respect Antonio Guterres, a good friend who I worked with on refugee issues together. But I think should not only be sending messages from New York, but trying to involve more.
We've talked about, for example, Japan and China quite a bit, but of course, there have been many different reactions from around the Asian region, and others have commented on, for example, ASEAN or India having a more restrained reaction. Can you share a little bit of your thoughts about why we see these different reactions across the region and how you would interpret this?
I'm sorry, ASEAN and India having a reaction on what? Ukraine?
Russia and the Ukraine war, that they have not necessarily taken a strong stance and have been much more hesitant to come forward with the same kinds of actions that we've seen from Europe and the US and Japan, for example.
I think India has been taking that kind of stance for several years. In 2018, they imported S-400 Russian missiles, land-air missiles, against the views expressed by United States. And also last year in December, Putin visited and agreed with Modi to sign military technology agreement, which lasts for 10 years. So India has always been not taking one side, but has been betting on both sides. That's the very Indian diplomacy. As for ASEAN, I think ASEAN countries, I think Indonesia and some countries have expressed clear views against Russian invasion, but usually many of the ASEAN countries do not take views which are not involving themselves and try to stay out of those. But still, when United Nations General Council, General Assembly met, I think most of the countries denounced Russia, the ASEANs as well.
So taking a view of the Asian region as a whole then, and what impacts we might see from the security environment. Of course, you've mentioned concerns about weakening norms and rules internationally and the dangers of intervention. What kinds of broader impacts do you see on the security environment besides these, if any?
I think if we could, the world can demonstrate the very strong will to win this game of patience against Mr. Putin. And what's very remarkable is that there are a lot of people, more than 10,000 people detained in Russia now, who are expressing views against Russia. This is the first time. So it's very important to show encouragement to those Russians as well, and to our colleagues in Asia, that if we stick together and if we enter this patience game, we will win in the end. If not, this is really that there could be a very dreadful picture, or that use of force can be not legalized, but could be accepted with time. So we should not let that happen. Maybe I'm repeating myself, but this is the very key.
This is definitely a key point to emphasize. We also have some questions actually about the economic impacts, which is related to the situation, of course, but could you comment a little bit on how you see this affecting the region economically?
Well, it's not only Asia, but the whole world will be affected, because Russia is the biggest supplier of European, world energy market, and nearly 50% of its export is energy sector. So it's, I think, to really exclude that is a very difficult task. And I think for countries like Germany, it'll take some time. But I commend Germany for having stopped Nord Stream 2, which was not an easy decision. And I think countries have to not maybe right away, but try to stop new projects, new investments, and I think economically, I think it'll affect us. But as I say, I think we have to really work with it. If we can't have both peace and prosperity at the time, peace is more important at this juncture.
We also have a question about North Korea, actually, which you mentioned at the beginning briefly. Of course, North Korea has been active as always during this period of time, but do you see there being any particular effects potentially on North Korea's actions due to the Ukraine crisis, or any connections there?
That I don't know, but if they see that there's a vacuum of power, if United States is totally engaged in European area and not paying attention to Asia, they may think that, hey, this is the time to sort of expand their influence as well. So I think US has to be looking at both ends, and in the end, it's not a zero-sum game against Japan and Europe, because we need both. Europe needs Japan, and Japan needs Europe to prosper and prosper in peace.
Related to that question, one of the audience members pointed out that we've recently seen statements of support between China and Russia, China and North Korea, and Russia and North Korea. So, do you see these links as strengthening? Many people have particularly commented on China, Russia, but do you think that just as democracies seem to be pulling together in solidarity, this conflict could also pull together authoritarian governments?
Yes, I think so, because they think it's a chance for them to unite against each other. Maybe they have different interests, China and Russia. The economy, the society is very different, but still, I think here, against democracy, they see merit in getting together, I think.
Yes. So we're reaching the end of our time. So if audience members have any last questions that they would like to put in the Q&A, please do so. Ambassador, I'd like to invite you to perhaps give some final reflections on the situation and share, from your perspective, what you think the most important thing from Japan's perspective, and perhaps from the perspective of Asian security, would be as we view this ongoing war in Ukraine.
Maybe I'm repeating myself, but this is a crucial moment. I've never seen this kind of thing happen. I've been living over 70 years, and three things I've never ever seen is happening. One is a huge natural disaster brought by climate change. Second, COVID-19. Nothing like this has happened in my life. Third is this Russian invasion. So we are looking at all these three happening at the same time. And we have to really stand up and fight all the three. As for COVID, luckily we have now vaccine. And as for environment, I think we can work together. Now, Russian aggression. This is a game of patience, so we have to stay together. This is point one. Point two, As for Asian situation, again, this is not a zero-sum game between Europe and Japan or Asia to get more attention of United States. We share the same common value. So let's don't think that it's a zero-sum game, nor please don't think that Japan is fundamentally changing the course. We really think that what we have been doing for 75 years after the war was right. If you go to ASEAN countries, polls, most countries, the country which is getting most respect in ASEAN countries, not China, not United States, it's Japan, because of assistance to them, because of diplomacy. And I think Japan will not, please don't think Japan is changing its course. I think there are some policy changes, but fundamental course, I don't think there'll be a great change. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. And we really do appreciate all of your perspectives and the insights that you have laid out today. I'd like to turn the floor over to Michal Baranovsky to close.
Thank you very much, Christy, for joining us and moderating. Ambassador Fujisaki, thank you for this fascinating conversation and all your thoughts. You know, I'm particularly struck, and frankly, this is what we hoped for, that, you know, the discussion and this conversation has shown that we are very much on the same boat, that from Japanese perspective, this is not some crisis that is happening in a faraway place, that this is in fact a common challenge that we have to overcome. You have emphasized the patience game, and we are in the beginning of this. We are just in day 20 of the war, and unfortunately a long time ahead of us and ahead of our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. But it was fascinating to hear your perspective, to connect it also to the Asian security. You mentioned that China is watching how Russia is dealt with and is dealing with the situation. So again, thank you very much for making this connection, making it very clear that, you know, what happens in Europe doesn't stay in Europe, and also, you know, what happens in Asia doesn't stay in Asia. And we are in this, unfortunately, as you said, in a very new era where we have to, where we are facing these challenges of deep confrontation with authoritarian states that happen to be cooperating as well. So I wanted to thank you on behalf of whole GMF, and perhaps also Ambassador Miyajima, I wanted to thank you. If you want to say anything else at the end as well, I would like to, invite you to do that, and then I will say goodbye to everyone.
Just a very few words. Thank you very much, Ambassador Fujisaki. I'm very happy that my choice was right, and
Thank you.
that the very wide-ranging, very tough question posed by Christy. Well, but it was a very good stimulating conversation about the Japanese kind of perspective that with such kind of wide experience is never heard in Europe. So this is very useful. And then German Marshall Fund is, of course, strengthening transatlantic cooperation, but please count on us. We are together. So let's work together. And then this is a very important step forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Absolutely. We are all in it together, and we are transatlantic, but as my friend Christy can testify, the Asia program is a strong part, one of the strongest programs at GMF, and we understand the stakes that are really throughout the globe in the more collective and the global West. Thank you all. Thank you for taking the time. Also our participants. To see you next time from Warsaw, from Japan, or from Washington DC in this tricky times. Over.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.